Singapore, officially the Republic of Singapore, is an island country and city-state in Southeast Asia. The country's territory comprises one main island, 63 satellite islands and islets, and one outlying islet. It is about 1 degree of latitude, 137 kilometers or 85 miles, north of the equator, off the southern tip of the Malay Peninsula, bordering the Strait of Malacca to the west, the Singapore Strait to the south along with the Riau Islands in Indonesia, the South China Sea to the east, and the Straits of Johor along with the state of Johor in Malaysia to the north. In its early history, Singapore was a maritime emporium known as Temasek and subsequently a major constituent part of several successive thalassocratic empires. Its contemporary era began in 1819, when Stamford Raffles established Singapore as an entrepot trading post of the British Empire. In 1867, Singapore came under the direct control of Britain as part of the Straits settlements. During World War II, Singapore was occupied by Japan in 1942 and returned to British control as a crown colony following Japan's surrender in 1945. Singapore gained self-governance in 1959 and, in 1963, became part of the new Federation of Malaysia, alongside Malaya, North Borneo, and Sarawak. Ideological differences led to Singapore's expulsion from the Federation 2 years later. Singapore became an independent sovereign country in 1965. After early years of turbulence and despite lacking natural resources and a hinterland, the nation rapidly developed to become one of the 4 Asian tigers. As a highly developed country, it has one of the highest PPP-adjusted GDP per capita. It is also identified as a tax haven. Singapore is the only country in Asia with a AAA sovereign credit rating from all major rating agencies. It is a major aviation, financial, and maritime shipping hub and has consistently been ranked as one of the most expensive cities to live in for expatriates and foreign workers. Singapore ranks highly in key social indicators: education, healthcare, quality of life, personal safety, infrastructure, and housing, with a homeownership rate of 88%. Singaporeans enjoy one of the longest life expectancies, fastest internet connection speeds, lowest infant mortality rates, and lowest levels of corruption in the world. It has the 3rd highest population density of any country, although there are numerous green and recreational spaces as a result of urban planning. With a multicultural population and in recognition of the cultural identities of the major ethnic groups within the nation, Singapore has 4 official languages: English, Malay, Mandarin, and Tamil. English is the common language, with exclusive use in numerous public services. Multiracialism is enshrined in the Constitution and continues to shape national policies. Singapore is a parliamentary republic and its legal system is based on common law. While it is constitutionally a multi-party democracy where free elections are regularly held, it functions as a de facto one-party state, with the People's Action Party, PP, maintaining continuous political dominance since 1959. The PAP's long-standing control has resulted in limited political pluralism and a highly centralized governance structure over national institutions. One of the 5 founding members of ASEAN, Singapore is also the headquarters of the Asia-Pacific Economic Cooperation Secretariat, the Pacific Economic Cooperation Council Secretariat, and is the host city of many international conferences and events. Singapore is also a member of the United Nations, the World Trade Organization, the East Asia Summit, the Non-Aligned Movement, and the Commonwealth of Nations. Name and etymology. The English name of Singapore is an anglicization of the native Malay name for the country, Singapura, Malay pronunciation, Siangapura, which was in turn derived from the Sanskrit word for Lion City, Ramanist, Sihapura, literally. Lion City, Siha means lion, Pura means city, or fortress. Pulau Ujong was one of the earliest references to Singapore Island, which corresponds to a Chinese account from the 3rd century referred to a place as Puluajong, a transcription of the Malay name for island at the end of a peninsula. Early references to the name Temasek or Temasek are found in the Nagara, a Javanese eulogy written in 1365, and a Vietnamese source from the same time period. The name possibly means sea town, being derived from the Malay Tasek, meaning sea or lake. The Chinese traveler Wang de Yuan visited a place around 1330 named Dan Maxi, Pinyin, Dan Maxi, Wade, Giles, Tan Ma Shi, or Tam Ma Sayak, depending on pronunciation. This may be a transcription of Temasek. Alternatively, it may be a combination of the Malay Tana meaning land and Chinese 11 meaning tin, which was traded on the island. Variations of the name Sahapura were used for a number of cities throughout the region prior to the establishment of the Kingdom of Singapura. In Hindu, Buddhist culture, lions were associated with power and protection, which may explain the attraction of such a name. The name Singapura supplanted Temasek sometime before the 15th century, after the establishment of the Kingdom of Singapura on the island by a fleeing Sumatran Raja, prince, from Palembang. However, the precise time and reason for the name change is unknown. The semi-historical Malay annals state that Temasek was christened Singapura by Sang Nila Utama, a 13th century Sumatran Raja from Palembang. The annals state that Sang Nila Utama encountered a strange beast on the island that he took to be a lion. Seeing this as an omen, he established the town of Singapura where he encountered the beast. The second hypothesis, drawn from Portuguese sources, postulates that this mythical story is based on the real-life Parmeswara of Palembang. Parmeswara declared independence from Majapahit and mounted a lion throne. After then being driven into exile by the Javanese, he usurped control over Temasek. He may have rechristened the area as Singapura, recalling the throne he had been driven from. Under Japanese occupation, Singapore was renamed Sinantu, Hepburn, Shonan, meaning Light of the South. Singapore is sometimes referred to by the nickname the Garden City, in reference to its parks and tree-lined streets. Another informal name, the Little Red, was adopted after an article in the Asian Wall Street Journal of August 4, 1998 said that Indonesian President B.J. Habibie referred to Singapore as a red on a map. History: Ancient Singapore. In 1299, according to the Malay Annals, the Kingdom of Singapura was founded on the island by Sang Nila Utama. Although the historicity of the accounts as given in the Malay Annals is the subject of academic debates, it is nevertheless known from various documents that Singapore in the 14th century, then known as Temasek, was a trading port under the influence of both the Majapahit Empire and the Siamese kingdoms, and was a part of the Indosphere. These Indianized kingdoms were characterized by surprising resilience, political integrity, and administrative stability. Historical sources also indicate that around the end of the 14th century, its ruler Parmeswara was attacked by either the Majapahit or the Siamese, forcing him to move to Malacca, where he founded the Sultanate of Malacca. Archaeological evidence suggests that the main settlement on Fort Canning Hill was abandoned around this time, although a small trading settlement continued in Singapore for some time afterwards. In 1613, Portuguese raiders burned down the settlement, and the island faded into obscurity for the next 2 centuries. By then, Singapore was nominally part of the Johor Sultanate. The wider maritime region and much trade was under Dutch control for the following period after the 1641 Dutch conquest of Malacca. British colonization. The British governor Stamford Raffles arrived in Singapore on January 28, 1819, and soon recognized the island as a natural choice for the new port. The island was then nominally ruled by Tengku Abdul Rahman, the Sultan of Johor, who was controlled by the Dutch and the Bugis. However, the Sultanate was weakened by factional division. Abdul Rahman, the Temenggung of Johor to Tengku Abdul Rahman, as well as his officials, were loyal to the Sultan's elder brother Tengku Long, who was living in exile in Penyengat Island, Riau Islands. With the Temenggung's help, Raffles managed to smuggle Tengku Long back into Singapore. Raffles offered to recognize Tengku Long as the rightful Sultan of Johor under the title of Sultan Hussein, as well as provide him with a yearly payment of $5,000 and another $3,000 to the Temenggung. In return, Sultan Hussein would grant the British the right to establish a trading post on Singapore. The Treaty of Singapore was signed on February 6, 1819. In 1824, a further treaty with the Sultan led to the entire island becoming a part of the British Empire. In 1826, Singapore became part of the Straits Settlements, then under the jurisdiction of British India. Singapore became the regional capital in 1836. Prior to Raffles' arrival, there were only about 1,000 people living on the island, mostly indigenous Malays along with a handful of Chinese. By 1860, the population had swelled to over 80,000, more than half being Chinese. Many of these early immigrants came to work on the pepper and gambir plantations. In 1867, the Straits Settlements were separated from British India, coming under the direct control of Britain. Later, in the 1890s, when the rubber industry became established in Malaya and Singapore, the island became a global center for rubber sorting and export. Singapore was not greatly affected by the First World War, 1914-18. As the conflict did not spread to Southeast Asia, the only significant event during the war was the 1915 Singapore Mutiny by Muslim sepoys from British India who were garrisoned in Singapore. After hearing rumors that they were to be sent to fight the Ottoman Empire, a Muslim state, the soldiers rebelled, killing their officers and several British civilians before the mutiny was suppressed by non-Muslim troops arriving from Johor and Burma. After World War I, the British built the large Singapore naval base as part of the defensive Singapore strategy. Originally announced in 1921, the construction of the base proceeded at a slow pace until the Japanese invasion of Manchuria in 1931. Costing $60 million and not fully completed in 1938, it was nonetheless the largest dry dock in the world, the third largest floating dock, and had enough fuel tanks to support the entire British Navy for 6 months. The base was defended by heavy 15-inch, 380mm naval guns stationed at Fort Siloso, Fort Canning, and Labrador, as well as a Royal Air Force airfield at Tenga Air Base. Winston Churchill touted it as the Gibraltar of the East, and military discussions often referred to the base as simply east of Suez. However, the British Home Fleet was stationed in Europe, and the British could not afford to build a second fleet to protect their interests in Asia. The plan was for the Home Fleet to sail quickly to Singapore in the event of an emergency. As a consequence, after World War II broke out in 1939, the fleet was fully occupied with defending Britain, leaving Singapore vulnerable to Japanese invasion. Japanese occupation. During the Pacific War, the Japanese invasion of Malaya culminated in the Battle of Singapore. When the British force of 60,000 troops surrendered on February 15, 1942, British Prime Minister Winston Churchill called the defeat the worst disaster and largest capitulation in British history. British and Empire losses during the fighting for Singapore were heavy, with a total of nearly 85,000 personnel captured. About 5,000 were killed or wounded, of which Australians made up the majority. Japanese casualties during the fighting in Singapore amounted to 1,714 killed and 3,378 wounded. The occupation was to become a major turning point in the histories of several nations, including those of Japan, Britain, and Singapore. Japanese newspapers triumphantly declared the victory as deciding the general situation of the war. Between 5,000 and 25,000 ethnic Chinese people were killed in the subsequent Sukching massacre. British forces had planned to liberate Singapore in 1945/1946. However, the war ended before these operations could be carried out. Post-war period. After the Japanese surrender to the Allies on August 15, 1945, Singapore fell into a brief state of violence and disorder. Looting and revenge killing were widespread. British, Australian, and Indian troops led by Lord Louis Mountbatten returned to Singapore to receive the formal surrender of Japanese forces in the region from General Saishiro Itagaki on behalf of General Hisaichi Terachi on September 12, 1945. Meanwhile, Tomoyuki Yamashita was tried by a U.S. military commission for war crimes, but not for crimes committed by his troops in Malaya or Singapore. He was convicted and hanged in the Philippines on February 23, 1946. Much of the infrastructure in Singapore had been destroyed during the war, including those needed to supply utilities. A shortage of food led to malnutrition, disease, and rampant crime and violence. A series of strikes in 1947 caused massive stoppages in public transport and other services. However, by late 1947, the economy began to recover, facilitated by a growing international demand for tin and rubber. The failure of Britain to successfully defend its colony against the Japanese changed its image in the eyes of Singaporeans. British military administration ended on April 1, 1946, and Singapore became a separate crown colony. In July 1947, separate executive and legislative councils were established, and the election of 6 members of the Legislative Council was scheduled for the following year. During the 1950s, Chinese communists, with strong ties to the trade unions and Chinese schools, waged a guerrilla war against the government, leading to the Malayan Emergency. The 1954 National Service riots, Hock Lee bus riots, and Chinese middle schools riots in Singapore were all linked to these events. David Marshall, pro-independence leader of the Labour Front, won Singapore's first general election in 1955. He led a delegation to London, and Britain rejected his demand for complete self-rule. He resigned and was replaced by Lim Yew Hock in 1956, and after further negotiations, Britain agreed to grant Singapore full internal self-government for all matters except defense and foreign affairs on June 3, 1959. Days before, in the May 30, 1959 election, the People's Action Party, PP, won a landslide victory. Governor Sir William Almond Codrington served as the first Yang di Pertuan Negara, head of state. Within Malaysia, PAP leaders believed that Singapore's future lay with Malaya due to strong ties between the two. It was thought that reuniting with Malaya would benefit the economy by creating a common market, alleviating ongoing unemployment woes in Singapore. However, a sizable left-wing faction of the PP was strongly opposed to the merger, fearing a loss of influence, and hence formed the Barisan Sosialis after being kicked out from the PP. The ruling party of Malaya, United Malay's national organization, UMNO, was staunchly anti-communist, and it was suspected UMNO would support the non-communist factions of PAP. UMNO, initially skeptical of the idea of a merger due to distrust of the PP government and concern that the large ethnic Chinese population in Singapore would alter the racial balance in Malaya on which their political power base depended, became supportive of the idea of the merger due to joint fear of a communist takeover. On May 27, 1961, Malaya's Prime Minister, Tunku Abdul Rahman, made a surprise proposal for a new federation called Malaysia, which would unite the current and former British possessions in the region, the Federation of Malaya, Singapore, Brunei, North Borneo, and Sarawak. UMNO leaders believed that the additional Malay population in the Bornean territories would balance Singapore's Chinese population. The British government, for its part, believed that the merger would prevent Singapore from becoming a haven for communism. To obtain a mandate for a merger, the PP held a referendum on the merger. This referendum included a choice of different terms for a merger with Malaysia and had no option for avoiding merger altogether. On September 16, 1963, Singapore joined with Malaya, the North Borneo, and Sarawak to form the new Federation of Malaysia under the terms of the Malaysia Agreement. Under this agreement, Singapore had a relatively high level of autonomy compared to the other states of Malaysia. Indonesia opposed the formation of Malaysia due to its own claims over Borneo and launched confrontation in Indonesian, in response to the formation of Malaysia. On March 10, 1965, a bomb planted by Indonesian saboteurs on a mezzanine floor of McDonald's house exploded, killing 3 people and injuring 33 others. It was the deadliest of at least 42 bomb incidents, which occurred during the confrontation. 2 members of the Indonesian Marine Corps, Osman bin Haji Muhammad Ali and Harun bin Said, were eventually convicted and executed for the crime. The explosion caused $250,000, equivalent to $2,494,456 in 2024, in damages to McDonald House. Even after the merger, the Singaporean government and the Malaysian central government disagreed on many political and economic issues. Despite an agreement to establish a common market, Singapore continued to face restrictions when trading with the rest of Malaysia. In retaliation, Singapore did not extend to Sabah and Sarawak the full extent of the loans agreed to for economic development of the 2 eastern states. Talks soon broke down, and abusive speeches and writing became rife on both sides. This led to communal strife in Singapore, culminating in the 1964 race riots. On August 7, 1965, Malaysian Prime Minister Tunku Abdul Rahman, seeing no alternative to avoid further bloodshed, and with the help of secret negotiations by PP leaders, as revealed in 2015, advised the Parliament of Malaysia that it should vote to expel Singapore from Malaysia. On August 9, 1965, the Malaysian Parliament voted 126-0 to move a bill to amend the constitution, expelling Singapore from Malaysia, which left Singapore as a newly independent country. Republic of Singapore. After being expelled from Malaysia, Singapore became independent as the Republic of Singapore on August 9, 1965, with Lee Kuan Yew and Yusof bin Ishak as the first Prime Minister and President respectively. In 1967, the country co-founded the Association of Southeast Asian Nations, ASEAN. Race riots broke out once more in 1969. Lee Kuan Yew's emphasis on rapid economic growth, support for business entrepreneurship, and limitations on internal democracy shaped Singapore's policies for the next half-century. Economic growth continued throughout the 1980s, with the unemployment rate falling to 3% and real GDP growth averaging at about 8% up until 1999. During the 1980s, Singapore began to shift towards high-tech industries, such as the wafer fabrication sector, in order to remain competitive as neighboring countries began manufacturing with cheaper labor. Singapore Changi Airport was opened in 1981 and Singapore Airlines was formed. The Port of Singapore became one of the world's busiest ports, and the service and tourism industries also grew immensely during this period. The PP has remained in power since independence. Some activists and opposition politicians see the government's strict regulation of political and media activities as an infringement on political rights. In response, Singapore has seen several significant political changes, such as the introduction of the non-constituency members of parliament in 1984 to allow up to 3 losing candidates from opposition parties to be appointed as MPs. Group representation constituencies, GRCs, were introduced in 1988 to create multi-seat electoral divisions intended to ensure minority representation in parliament. Nominated members of parliament were introduced in 1990 to allow non-elected, non-partisan MPs. The Constitution was amended in 1991 to provide for an elected president who has veto power in the use of past reserves and appointments to certain public offices. In 1990, Goh Chok Tong succeeded Lee and became Singapore's second prime minister. During Goh's tenure, the country went through the 1997 Asian financial crisis and the 2003 SARS outbreak. In 2004, Lee Hsien Loong, the eldest son of Lee Kuan Yew, became the country's third prime minister. Lee Hsien Loong's tenure included the 2008 financial crisis, the resolution of a dispute over land ownership at Tanjong Pagar railway station between Singapore and Malaysia, the introduction of the two integrated resorts, IRs, located at the Marina Bay Sands and Resorts World Sentosa, and the COVID-19 pandemic. The PP suffered its worst ever electoral results in 2011, winning just 60% of votes, amidst debate over issues including the influx of foreign workers and the high cost of living. On March 23, 2015, Lee Kuan Yew died, and a one-week period of public mourning was observed nationwide. Subsequently, the PP regained its dominance in parliament through the September general election, receiving 69.9% of the popular vote, although this remained lower than the 2001 tally of 75.3% and the 1968 tally of 86.7%. The 2020 election held in July saw the PP drop to 61% of the vote, while the Workers' Party took 10 of the 93 seats, the highest number ever won by another party. On May 15, 2024, Lawrence Wong became Singapore's fourth Prime Minister. He is the first Prime Minister born after independence. His first electoral test in the 2025 election saw the PP winning 65.5% of the vote and 87 out of 97 seats in Parliament.